The ground trembles. First, a whisper beneath their feet. Then, a deafening roar. Screams shatter the silence, the earth splits in two. Dust rises, swallowing everything in a suffocating veil. Men run, stumble, try to escape, but there's nowhere to go. Cracks spread like ravenous serpents, devouring everything in their path. Panic takes over. One moment, they're there, the next, they're gone, swallowed alive. The ground seals shut, and they vanish as if they never existed. What just happened? A natural disaster? An unexpected earthquake? Or a terrifying judgment from a force that cannot be challenged? The earth split beneath their feet, and this story is real. But this sentence was pronounced long before the first tremor. Something condemned them, an irreversible mistake, a choice that could not be undone. And when they realized it, it was already too late. But what if that force is still watching? What if the same judgment could happen again, at any moment, to anyone? Are you sure you're safe? To understand how this tragedy began, we must go back to that camp, and to the man who chose to challenge the wrong power, and paid a price far too high. Among the many biblical figures whose stories are shrouded in mystery and divine warnings, one name stands out: Korah. But who was this man? Was he just another among the countless descendants of Levi? Or was there something more, something that made him different, dangerous? The biblical account reveals that Korah was no ordinary Levite. He had access to the sacred sanctuary, knew the ordinances of God's word, and lived immersed in the spiritual routine of the chosen people. Yet, unlike Moses and Aaron, who served God with reverence, Korah saw himself as destined for much more. The context in which it all happened was tense. The people of Israel were going through a critical phase, living in the wilderness, dependent on God's promises and the daily miracles that sustained them. Manna fell from the sky, the divine presence guided them, yet their hearts were restless. There were murmurs, complaints, doubts, and where there is doubt, there is always the threat of conflict. Korah noticed this, and he was not alone. Dathan and Abiram, influential leaders among the tribes, were also dissatisfied. And not just them. 250 men, princes of the people, respected leaders, joined this silent conspiracy. But what fueled this opposition? What could drive men who had witnessed great wonders, plagues in Egypt, the pillar of fire, the parting of the Red Sea, and so many other signs, to challenge Moses and Aaron? The issue was never just Moses' leadership, it was something deeper: pride, ambition, a thirst for power. Korah looked at Aaron and saw someone occupying a position that, in his eyes, could have been his. After all, was he not also a Levite? Did he not serve the Most High God? Why should only Aaron and his sons have the privilege of the priesthood? This question grew within him, turning into a corrosive feeling that spread like a silent infection among those who harbored hidden grievances. This kind of rebellion does not happen overnight. It takes shape in whispers, in hushed conversations, in clandestine meetings, in insinuations disguised as grievances. Are we not all holy? This was the message Korah and his allies spread. Why should only Moses and Aaron rule over us? The idea seemed fair, reasonable, and many began to listen. It was a cunning strategy. Korah did not confront Moses directly but planted seeds of doubt among the people. But something greater was at stake. The scriptures show us that this was not just a political dispute, it was a spiritual battle. God had established Moses' leadership and Aaron's priesthood. To question this order was to question divine authority itself. But Korah did not see it that way. He saw himself as a liberator, a man challenging an unjust system. What he did not realize was that his rebellion was about to unleash a judgment that would go down in biblical history as one of the most terrifying events of the Old Testament. Then the moment came. Korah and his allies decided to act. They would no longer hide. It was time to confront Moses, challenge his authority, and claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. But were they ready for the consequences? Did they understand what they were provoking? Their fate was already sealed, they just hadn't realized it yet. Night fell over the camp of Israel, but it did not bring peace. Beneath the vast desert sky, where only the flickering campfires pushed back the darkness, a group of men gathered in secret. Their gazes were serious, their voices hushed, as if fearing that even the wind might carry their words to the wrong ears. Korah stood at the center, his silhouette firm and resolute, his eyes, reflecting the wavering flames, revealed a glimmer of ambition. He did not need to convince these men. The seed of rebellion had already been planted, and its first fruits were beginning to sprout. 250 princes, respected leaders among the tribes, were there because they saw in Korah an alternative path, one that did not include Moses or Aaron. Are we not all holy? His voice cut through the silence. Why must we bow only to them? Is God not among all his people? Why should only one family have the privilege of the priesthood? Heads nodded in agreement. Frustration burned in their eyes, a sense of injustice smoldering in their hearts. Korah knew this and used every word to fan the flames of revolt. Moses rules like a king, but who put him there? A dramatic pause followed. Then, the venom of uncertainty took hold. Was it God, or was it himself? The effect was immediate. Murmurs spread like embers in the wind. Doubt, that silent poison, had already taken root. The plan took shape there, in the shadows of that clandestine meeting. They would no longer remain in the dark, it was time to act. Moses had to be confronted publicly, before all the people. They would force him to justify his authority. Korah knew that many were already discontent, and before an uncertain crowd, a leader could become vulnerable. The perfect moment had arrived. As the sun rose over the camp, the conspirators were ready. The desert, which had so often been the stage for biblical miracles, was now about to witness an unprecedented challenge. Korah stepped forward, surrounded by his allies, and raised his voice for all to hear. "Moses," he called, his tone a mix of respect and accusation. "You set yourself above the Lord's people, but are we not all chosen? Are we not all holy? Why should you and Aaron rule alone?" The camp fell silent. All eyes turned to Moses. What would he say? How would he respond? Before a single word could be spoken, something imperceptible already lingered in the air, a tension beyond words, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for the unfolding of a fate already sealed. The camp was suspended in silence. Korah, standing before the crowd, waited for Moses' reaction. The air felt heavier, as if something invisible threatened the entire people. But Moses did not respond with anger, he did not shout, did not accuse. Instead, he fell to his knees, lowered his face to the ground, and sought God. The gesture, so simple yet so profound, made the tension ripple through the hearts of those present. This was not a duel between men, it was a confrontation between God's will and human arrogance. Moses' voice rose, firm but without pride. "Tomorrow, the Lord will show who belongs to him, who is holy, and whom he allows to come near. You, Korah and your followers, bring censers and burn incense before the Lord, and God will make his choice." There was something unsettling about this proposal. The burning of incense was a priestly act, a symbol of intercession before the Most High, but only those whom God had set apart could offer such a sacrifice without consequence. The crowd exchanged glances, no one dared speak, but Korah smiled. To him, this was not a judgment, it was an opportunity. It was his chance to prove himself before everyone. He accepted without hesitation. Dawn arrived with an eerie silence. The air was thick, almost electric. Men gathered, whispering among themselves, trying to predict what would happen. 250 princes stood, each holding a censer, ready to challenge the order established by God. Moses stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the crowd, and said, "You have joined Korah, but do you know what you are doing? You are not rebelling against me, you are rebelling against the Lord himself." The tension escalated. Some glanced at each other, uncertain, but to back down now would be to admit defeat. They had gone too far. The censers were raised. The aroma of incense began to spread through the morning air. Along with it, something unseen seemed to stir, a presence so real and yet so terrifying. It was as if all of heaven had paused to witness what was about to unfold. The moment of truth had arrived. Korah and his followers' fate was already sealed, and they didn't realize it. The smoke from the censers rose into the air, forming dense spirals that drifted over the camp. The 250 men who followed Korah stood before the tabernacle, burning incense as if they were priests, defying the order established by God himself. There was something solemn, yet deeply unsettling about it. It was like witnessing a forbidden ritual, an act of defiance that none of them seemed to fear. The people watched from a distance, uneasy. Moses' words still echoed in their minds. Tomorrow, the Lord will show who belongs to him. But now, as the smoke spread, an invisible weight seemed to press upon them all. The air grew thick, almost unbreathable. Moses and Aaron were there, but something made them shudder. A voice echoed, not in sound, but in a deep calling that only they could hear. God warned them, "Step away from these people, for I am about to destroy them at once." Moses' eyes widened. He understood the gravity of what was about to happen. "Quick," he shouted to Aaron. "Let's get out of here." There was urgency, a fear even Moses could not contain. But Korah, Dathan, and Abiram remained, unmoved. Their expressions were filled with confidence. To them, this was merely a formality. They did not believe anything would truly happen. After all, they were convinced that God would choose them. They exchanged glances and smirked with disdain. Moses always exaggerated things. Nothing would happen, nothing would change. But the people, oh, they were afraid. Many wanted to flee, but what they were witnessing was too great to ignore. The most anticipated moment had arrived, and in mere moments, everything would change. Silence hung over the camp. It was the kind of silence that was thick, oppressive, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Moses stepped forward, his gaze heavy as lead. Then, with a voice filled with urgency that made many hearts pound, he cried out, "Move away from the tents of these men." Some hesitated, but Moses' tone left no room for doubt. Families began to move, eyes wide, hands trembling. And then, it happened. The first sign was an almost imperceptible tremor, like a whisper rising from the depths. Then, a dry crack, like wood splitting in half. Dust rose, the ground twisted beneath their feet. A sharp snap cut through the air, and the earth split into a thin, sinister line that spread rapidly. An indescribable sound erupted from the foundations of the earth. It was not thunder, nor the roar of a storm. It was as if something colossal was opening its mouth, hungry, ready to devour. The fissure widened abruptly. The ground vanished beneath Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and all who stood with them. Their screams pierced the air, echoing like the wails of those who realized too late they had made a fatal mistake. Their tents, their possessions, everything they owned was swallowed into the void. The people watched in shock. Some covered their mouths, unable to utter a sound. Others stumbled back, trying to escape what felt like an inescapable judgment. But the horror was not over. The earth kept opening, as if it were alive, as if it were ravenous. Fear turned to panic, screams mixed with the growing roar of the collapsing ground. Men, women, and children ran in opposite directions, unsure if they too would be dragged into the bottomless abyss. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The ground ceased to shake, silence returned. Dust floated like a specter over the place where, moments ago, there had been people. But now, there was nothing, only emptiness. The camp would never be the same again. Terror still hung over the camp. The dust had barely settled, and the void where Korah, Dathan, and Abiram once stood remained like an open wound in the earth. But the judgment was not yet over. A deathly silence took hold. The 250 men who had burned incense were still there, censers in hand, eyes wide, faces pale. None dared to speak. They had seen their leaders swallowed by the abyss, yet they still stood. Had they escaped? Would God spare them? Then, the air shifted. An intense heat filled the space, as if a massive, unseen furnace had been unleashed. The wind stirred, and a blinding glow burst forth from the heavens. Without warning, flames descended with fury, a fire not of this world. There was no time to flee, no time to scream. In an instant, the fire engulfed them, consuming everything. The crowd watched in sheer horror. The blaze reflected in the eyes of those around, frozen in fear. The scent of ashes and burned flesh filled the air. When the fire finally dissipated, the bodies of the rebels were gone. Only the bronze censers remained, scattered across the ground, silent witnesses to the second wave of divine judgment. No one dared to speak. It was as if time itself had stopped. Every gaze, lost between the dust and the ashes, searched for an answer. But only one truth remained: God's justice does not fail, and when heaven speaks, the earth listens. But something still needed to be done. Those censers, tainted by rebellion, could not simply be discarded. God would give an unexpected command, a final reminder of what had happened there, something no one would ever forget. The camp was still wrapped in a heavy silence. No one dared to move, no one dared to whisper. The scent of ashes and the churned-up earth still lingered, a visible reminder of what had just taken place. Then, like thunder shattering the stillness, the people fell to their knees. Desperate cries echoed through the desert. "Moses! Aaron! Intercede for us!" Terror had spread. If God had destroyed those men, who could guarantee he would not come against them as well? Many wept, others beat their chests in despair, remorseful for ever having listened to the whispers of rebellion. But God was not finished yet. There was still something to be done. The bronze censers of the men who had dared to challenge his order still lay scattered across the scorched ground, glistening among the ashes. Objects meant to honor God were now tainted by the sin of pride. They could not simply be discarded. They had to become a reminder, a warning for all future generations. The command was given to Moses. The priest Eleazar, son of Aaron, was to collect the censers from among the smoldering remains and scatter the embers, for those objects were holy. Then, the censers were to be handed over to craftsmen, who would melt them down for a new purpose. The metal was taken to the fire, melted, and reshaped until it became a covering for the altar of the tabernacle. Every time a priest approached to offer sacrifices to the Lord, he would see that fused metal and remember what had happened to those who tried to claim a position that was not theirs. That sacred covering would not be just an ornament, it would be a silent testimony, a perpetual warning. The fear of God spread among the tribes. No one dared to question the leadership of Moses and Aaron anymore. What was once murmuring had turned into reverence. The tongues that had spoken against the Lord's chosen ones were now silenced, for all knew, one does not stand against the authority of God. But the conclusion of this story held one final twist, for not everyone had learned the lesson. The sun rose over a camp marked by fear. Ash still floated in the air, the ground remained cracked where the earth had swallowed the rebels, and the scent of divine fire still whipped through the wind. But incredibly, the horror of the previous day was not enough to silence the rebellion. The murmuring began softly, like embers beneath the ash. Then, it ignited into outraged voices. "You have killed the Lord's people." The accusation spread like poison. The Israelites, who had witnessed the judgment of Korah and his allies, now turned against Moses and Aaron. The uproar grew. Men and women gathered in front of the tabernacle, shouting their indignation. Moses and Aaron knew this would provoke something terrible once again, and before they could finish their thoughts, the response came. The glory of God appeared over the tabernacle. A brilliant light filled the place, and a deadly silence fell over the people. It was the same sign that had preceded the judgment of the previous day. Moses turned to Aaron, his eyes filled with urgency. As God commanded, "Step away from this congregation, I will destroy them at once." But Moses knew the heart of the Lord. He understood that there was still a chance, so he shouted to Aaron, "Quickly, take a censer, put fire from the altar and place incense on it. Hurry! Intercede for the people, for the plague has already begun." And the plague was indeed spreading. Like an invisible shadow, it swept through the camp. People fell to the ground, breathless, lifeless. Aaron ran. The high priest, an elderly man, rushed through the camp holding the censer, the sacred aroma mixing with the stench of death. He did not hesitate. He stopped exactly between the living and the dead and lifted the incense before God. And so, the plague stopped. The people, who moments before had been consumed by rebellion, now wept in despair. Their cries of rage turned into wails of terror. The judgment had been devastating, thousands had perished, and it could have been far worse. Aaron's intercession had halted the advance of destruction. The entire camp trembled at what had happened. Once again it was clear, to challenge God's authority had fatal consequences, and on that day, standing between the living and the dead, Aaron proved that true leadership was not in those who seized power by force, but in those who stood between the people and divine judgment. The desert dust settled, but the mark of divine judgment remained. The camp of Israel was never the same again. Korah and his allies were swallowed by the abyss, consumed in an instant. But the echoes of this rebellion did not vanish with them. What went through Korah's mind in those final moments? Did he realize his mistake at the last second? Or did he descend into the abyss still convinced of his cause? Beyond the tragedy itself, there was the impact on Moses' leadership. This event undeniably solidified the authority God had given him. The people, who had murmured against him so many times, saw with their own eyes what it meant to defy divine will. Moses did not have to defend himself, God spoke for him. But how did this shape his journey from that moment on? Did he feel an even greater weight of responsibility? Did this event further harden the hearts of the people, or did they finally grasp the gravity of their rebellion? The most intriguing thing, however, is that this was not the last time humanity challenged divine authority. Centuries passed, and the pattern repeated itself. Leaders rose, rebellions formed, hearts grew hardened. Even today, resistance against God's established order continues. The story of Korah is an echo of something far greater. But have we learned the lesson, or are we once again on the verge of seeing the earth open? The dust of Korah's rebellion settled thousands of years ago, but the marks of that event never disappeared. The earth closed over the rebels, fire consumed the defiant princes, and the plague was halted only by Aaron's desperate intercession. But now I ask you, did this story truly remain in the past? Or, in some way, are we still repeating the same mistakes? The dissatisfaction of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram did not arise spontaneously. It grew in their hearts, was fed by pride, and spread like an epidemic among the people. What happened there was judgment, yes, but also a warning. Because true rebellion against God does not begin with visible acts, it begins in thoughts, in murmuring, in the seed of dissatisfaction planted within the heart. And today, look around. We live in times where authority is challenged at every moment. People rise against established principles, against God's word, against everything ordained by the Creator. The voice of rebellion echoes in speeches, in actions, in choices that lead humanity away from its true calling. But are we paying attention? Do we recognize when we are following the same path as Korah without realizing it? What if there was more behind this event than we imagine? What if this story was not just about a Levite who defied Moses, but a reflection of something much greater, something still happening behind the scenes of the spiritual world? There are battles we do not see, wars being fought where the true struggle is for our faith and obedience. Korah's story is a warning, but it is also a message of hope, because God does not desire destruction, He desires transformation. Even today, He is calling those who choose humility over pride, obedience over rebellion, trust over doubt. Now, I invite you to reflect. In what areas of your life might you be resisting God's direction? Where does your true loyalty lie? What did this story speak to your heart? Leave your comment below, share your thoughts, your lessons, your perspective, and if this video left an impression on you, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to keep receiving revealing content about the stories of the Bible. And if you want to continue this journey of discovery, I have a special video for you. Click on the card or check the link in the description to dive into another astonishing biblical account. May the truth of God's Word guide us. See you in the next video.